all about writing with Ben and Sara.
Welcome to All About Writing, the podcast that covers everything about the world of writing from the inside out. This is episode 10, part 1 on our series on getting started. I'm Ben, here with my co-host Sara, who is an award-winning author, screenwriter, editor, and TED Talk presenter.
And I'm Sara, here with my co-host Ben, who is an award-winning best-selling author and ghostwriter, editor, and publisher. And today we are talking about not only getting started, but before you even put your pen to paper or your hands on your keyboard, what inspires us or what inspires you and where we find inspiration for our novels or our screenplays or our teleplays or our poems, whatever it is that you're writing about. And we were laughing right before we started this because Ben was like, I guess I'll have to wing this. And I was like, so what does inspire you? Do you just make it up the entire time, Ben?
So yeah, a lot of the time, but it's true. We all start from somewhere. And, there's lots of things that can inspire us. And I'm just going to jump right in. I'm going to go way back to childhood here for me because I write science fiction. And there's a very, very simple reason why I write science fiction. Because I was 4 years old when the first Star Wars movie came out. And my mom says that my brother and I basically didn't blink for 2 hours. We sat there like that. And it basically shaped my entire worldview. When I years later was in the Navy and we were out in the North Pacific and we were doing flight operations, and I thought to myself, this is really cool, but it'd be even cooler if it was in space, because everything to me is cooler if it's in space. All right, and so that's the sort of thing which I draw inspiration from all the time, like watching the space shuttle, watching the Voyager probes, watching all the things that humanity has done for real in space. I find really inspiring. I don't necessarily get too close into all the technical details of it because, let's be honest, going to space is hard. It's really hard. And, you can write drama about that, but that's not the kind of drama I write because the Millennium Falcon goes into space really easy. So I want to keep it like that. So, that's just an example for me of something, an influence that hit me really early on in life that just kind of shaped the way I look at everything and what draws me in. So that's it. That's what inspires me. Star Wars. We're done. Okay, I'm out of here.
Yeah, that's it. That's your only inspiration ever is Star Wars. It's the world around you doesn't inspire you.
Yes.
Your relationships.
Yes.
No,
How about you?
we can dive into any of that, really. If you think about it, a good author is always looking around them and is inspired by, a sunset they saw, and then that makes its way as a half sentence into a book. It's always, write what you know and write what you've experienced is kind of one of those things that everybody always puts in your ear when you're a writer. And I do think that makes a more richer product, a richer piece of art. But that said, when you are dealing with space or fantasy, or even in my case, fantasy, I'll write fantasy, but I also write a ton of historical fiction. And obviously I didn't live in the old days. I don't know what it was like in 1820 in real life. But I, if you want to go back to childhood too, I have been inspired by so many things. I've been inspired by fairy tales and myths, and I've been inspired by, old movies. And I used to read a ton of classic literature growing up. It was not unusual for me in seventh, eighth grade. You'd see me reading an unabridged version of Bronte, or some sort of, difficult Old English book. And I will say that I don't really realize it until, later, or I'll see reviews of people, some of my books, but I write as if I'm in the 1800s or early 1900s. Like the style and tone of what I write harkens back to those impressionable years where those types of phrases and the way people speak that's how I think in my head when I'm writing. It's how my characters sound. It's how my tone is on the book, my style, my voice. And it's not, obviously, I don't talk like that in real life, right? But it definitely has made an impression. So in a way, it's like what inspires you is also the same thing as what has made impressions upon you that you feel are so strong, you have to write them on the page.
Yeah, and I think there's two ways to look at this. You're absolutely right. One is stuff like we've talked about, like some of the literature that you've read, some of the movies that I've seen. They had an impact on us, and they really spoke to us. Like we enjoyed them. Like wow, that's great. I want to do something like that. That's one way to be inspired. But there are lots of ways. I mean, you touched on it, Sarah, but just how things that happen in our lives, right? Like a sunset that you see, or a moment that you experience or witness. Like as we go through our lives, we have interesting encounters. We have interesting challenges we have to face. And they can be inspiration too, because you come through something and go, whoa, that that was quite something. Like, what am I feeling right now? And if you're a writer, you can go, okay, well, I have to remember this. Like, why am I feeling like this? Why did I do that? Okay, let me understand that. And it can really help um, to feed our character development. If the better we can understand, why we did something or why somebody else did something, even if we just guess, it can really help us to make realistic characters based on things that we've seen in real life. So real life can definitely inspire us in lots of different ways, good and bad, for sure.
Yeah, I actually, one of my earlier editors, Craig, he used to say when I would be going through something, frustrating or trying, especially, dealing with certain properties or even with Hollywood things. And he's like, jot down your physiological responses in
Mm,
these hours or days. How do you feel? What is your heart rate like? What are your muscles like? How, embody these feelings. And then when you have a character who is dealing with something stressful, you can properly kind of call out those physical responses to those situations.
mhm,
And
mhm.
I mean, that was a really great idea. And I do that now. And I also think too, having using those, I think a writer is some writers, not everybody, but I think a lot of writers, if they're a good writer, they're really just excellent observers of themselves and
Mhm.
of people around them and can make
Yeah,
inferences and assumptions about people around them, and then are very good at articulating them on the page.
yeah,
That's truly what is an inspiration. I mean, even people who don't go from real life, like they're making up characters that they say are completely made up, are not based on anyone they've known or a situation that they've never been in, but they're guessing. They're still they're still putting a kernel of their reality in it, right? And they're still inspired by something. It might even be an emotion, not even a person or a thing, but they're inspired by a feeling inside. So
yeah.
inspiration doesn't even have to be something tactile. It can be just I'm a depressed person, and so I write these kinds of books. I don't know. I'm not. I'm just calling out, but um uh I think, yeah, I was thinking of something super inappropriate just now, but like I'm just gonna say it. But like I remember when I was younger, like way younger, and my only understanding of sex was what I had read in books. And so when I would write sex scenes, I would have no language for sex except for it's almost copying what I had already read, but nothing that I had experienced. And looking
Right.
back, I laugh because I'm like, I clearly had no idea what I was talking about.
Very book smart, this one. Yes. No
Yeah,
experience.
yes.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was just a very literary example of those kinds of emotions and sensations.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's funny where we can draw inspiration from. Like for example, I do read sci-fi just because I'm curious what's out in the genre, what do other people do, but I don't read them sort of looking for inspiration. In fact, I would recommend against doing that because you don't want to be so inspired by an author in your genre that you start to copy them, right? You don't want to do that. But I read just for fun. What I find often writing sci-fi is when I'm reading nonfiction. That's what will inspire me. It doesn't have to be even like science nonfiction, like, you know, physics. It can be like a history book or something. But when I'm reading nonfiction that I'm interested in, my brain is just churning away. And I'll be sitting there reading about, I don't know, Senate rivalries in Republic Rome, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, that's why they have to launch the shuttle in that mission, right? Because the brain is now active and it's just firing on more cylinders and is coming up with ideas. And then when it's ready, boom, there it comes. Nothing to do with what I was reading, but I was fascinated with what I was reading, and my brain was working hard, and so it comes out. So I find that really fun. Keeping your brain active and just, like you said, observing and just thinking about stuff. And it's amazing the connections that your brain can make. If you're chewing on a particular scene that you just haven't been able to crack yet, like, stop thinking about it. Go read something else, go watch something else that you like, and probably your brain will figure it out and will help you along.
For sure. And I do think too, you know, that you made a great point that read something tangential to what, you know, in a way, like I write very specific types of historical fiction. I'm not all over the place, right? But I love reading Archaeology magazine. And I'm not going to find really anything in there that's going to pertain to late 1800s South Dakota. Maybe occasionally there'll be something but it's not going to be relevant to my characters or my stories, say.
Yeah.
But I'm going to read something, or even, you know, for some of my fantasy books, I'll read something and I'll be like, I am totally dropping that one ancient god from Kush into, you know, I mean, you don't even know where you might find something you can use. But, you know, reading something, you know, around, or another thing that I like to kind of point out that people don't use a lot, but if you're struggling with character, maybe you have a great plot, or, you know, your structure is fine, but you need character inspiration. Um, Read self-help books.
Really?
Find inspiration from self-help books, because they're going to be talking to people who, you know, have hangups, and you might be able to build a character like, oh,
Mm,
this is a character who's going to do this. And then you can kind of almost like, from the pointers on like how not to be this, you can make your character a complicated character that way. And
yeah.
it's the most unusual way of thinking of building characters, is to go to self-help books. But it's like the my biggest like not kept secret, because I'm telling you everybody now. But I do that a lot.
Yeah.
And it's harder to do, but you make really interesting characters, the kind of characters that people are kind of just, people sometimes read some of the characters in my book and they're like, I don't really like that main character. Like, she makes some questionable choices. I'm like, but don't you know people who make questionable choices in real life? You
Yeah.
know, and they're charismatic, but like, you're like, but maybe that's not a great choice for you, and you just made it. Okay, like, now you're gonna have problems. Oh, look, you do. Like, it's
Yeah. I mean, it's conflict, right? Our stories have to have conflict. Our characters have to make mistakes or make questionable decisions. Best of all, if we understand why they made that questionable decision. You know, it's a sympathetic decision, even if it's the wrong one. That's brilliant writing there. Um, and as we look at our lives and we look at situations that we've been through or that we've witnessed people go through, you know, certainly as you said, as a writer, you should be an observer and think, well, why why did that happen? Why did that person make that decision? It can make us better people because we can be more empathetic to others, but it can also make us great writers because we can see that. I know for a fact that one of the antagonists in one of my trilogies um, is definitely based loosely on two people that I knew in university, one of whom was an absolute manipulative witch, and the other was uh, they used people of the opposite gender quite a lot. And I sort of took elements from both of them and made this new character who is an absolutely vile human being, but I've often had readers, when I ask them, who's your favorite character? They'll say that one, because that person is so destructive, but so realistically so. Like, oh, you can't help but cheer for them because they're so bad. So, even in our pain, we can draw out these great characteristics, these great ideas, and if we can just use our creativity to turn them into something that we can work into a story, then you've got a great character. And so, inspiration from pain. And I hate having to say that, because I know as authors, none of us want to experience pain, but let's be honest, that's where we learn the most, and that's where the most interesting stories come from.
That's a great like inspirational ending spinning that. I'm impressed with you. Did you plan that? Were you inspired to end?
No, totally winged it.
Okay.
Totally winged it. But you're right. On that, I think we're going to call that a show. That's
Yes.
our show for everyone today. So please, Sarah, over to you. Sorry,
Yes,
I'm
yes.
still,
No,
I'm still
I
in the
I just want to remind everybody not to don't forget to subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this inspirational podcast this time, so that you don't miss any more inspirational chats and podcasts. And then please, if you can, feel free to leave a review. We really appreciate that too. It really does help us a lot. And don't forget to find Ben at ben@rcoles.com, as well as on Facebook and on Instagram.
And you can catch up with Sarah at saradahman.com and on Instagram. So thanks for joining us today. Please reach out if there are any topics that you'd like us to cover, and we'll see you again when we next chat all about writing.
This has been All About Writing with Ben and Sarah.